Now, for this story, I wanted to speak to someone who was personally impacted by the decline of local papers. Phil Reisman, he worked for the Journal News for 4 decades until the paper eliminated his position summarily late last year. Now, he has a radio talk show on WVOX, and we recently sat down with Phil. You and I are both pretty similar in that we don't like to blow the sunshine and all the rest. One of my favorite columnists of any paper, and I know I speak for many. I won't do all the recriminations why I thought it was one of the dumbest things I ever saw. But first do the human element, not just you, but so many others through so many rounds, and beyond even the morale that's so bad, not just the papers like that and so many others, but you saw something that when you came into it as an entity and a journalist and a print journalist, I mean, they used to joke, you guys write in crayon, meaning the TV guys, but if that's the print journalist, what has happened to that institution and all the people and all the knowledge that's been acquired over the years that like that has disappeared in the last decade?
Well, you know what? You're right. It was the last decade. But you know what? If you look back in time, Richard, you can probably mark the beginning of the end about 1994 or 1993. And I'll just throw this out as a marker. That was the year that the New York Times bought the Boston Globe for $1.1 billion. $1.1 billion. Sold it about 10 years ago. I don't know when it was, for about $70 million. And this was the, the dawn of the internet.
Now you can buy it just if you'll assume the liabilities in terms of the pension, et cetera.
Yes. So, I mean, the writing has been on the wall for a long time, and as you just said, the last 10 years it's accelerated. It's accelerated with the, the expansion of digital technology, the advent of the smartphone, social media, all those things have contributed to this idea that everybody's now a journalist. You know what I mean? If you have a smartphone, you can be your own with a Twitter account. Donald Trump, classic example.
But the people, when I talk to some of my friends who, and you know far more than I do, one of the things that galls them is when they say, well, what's the plan? How do we measure success? It's on how many clicks. And as a consequence, let's look at the headlines, many of them today. Indian Point. With 20 million people surrounding it in a 50-mile radius. Huge questions about, from an energy component, a safety component, all the jobs that will be impacted in Buchanan and beyond, and all the host of questions. You can't do that in 140 characters. You need someone who knows what it's about. And my fear is, and this isn't self-serving to you and others, people need to have acquired knowledge to give a full picture to the consumer. It's more than just it's going to close in X years. All the things that go into it, and that is in such short supply now.
Well, and also I just find it hard to believe personally that people can read an in-depth story like that on a handheld device. I don't think the attention span or the actual physical aspect of reading on your palm really is conducive to writing big takeout stories. You mentioned clicks. An Indian Point story will get a lot of clicks. But if you notice that there's a greater emphasis on sort of the candy of news now, more or less than the
top 10 lists.
Yeah, the top 10 lists, the gallery of photos, click for the next, click for the next. And, I don't think it's an accident.
Take the recent tragedy in Mount Vernon. If it's limited to covering a single tragedy and not the whys that led up to it, and not the context of the people in the community that have seen this and the petty partisan politics that isn't doing the public's will. If people don't have the time, let alone the capacity to get into that, we are far worse served, and you don't shine a light on it. And isn't that one of the real worries, that you can't do this all at 10,000 feet?
No, and also, I can tell you, because I lived through the era when Mount Vernon had, at my newspaper, had, 6 or 7 reporters covering that city. So that you had all aspects of something like that would have been certainly, given a lot of attention to, but in context with other things going on in the city. There's one reporter now covering Mount Vernon who's also responsible, get this, for covering the city of Yonkers. That's 200,000 people right there. So, Yonkers at one time probably had at least 8 or 9 full-time reporters covering it. That's an important city. It's got real issues. Mount Vernon too.
I know it's a little bit of both, but do you think, even with diminished resources, the papers can't do the kind of stories they used to because they don't have enough feet on the ground? Or do you think it's also a matter of will or priorities, that they'd rather be more focused on the metric of who clicks on what?
Well, I mean, there will be people who will argue against what I'm saying, but I can tell you that the old social contract or the old business contract that editors had with their readers as newspaper editors was, in exchange for your subscribing to my paper, I will, in exchange, my deal for you is to make judgments about what is the news in your community and how it should be covered, how much it should be covered, and where it plays in the paper. Now, there's certain obvious things like Indian Point, but there are other things that may not be so obvious. And what's happened is, because there's this emphasis on metrics and analytics and things like that, now it's the editor really doesn't play that strong a role in making a decision. They're now saying it's the readers want, you know, the best pizzerias in town. That's what we're going to write about. We need watchdogs, and we need people in this field, and we're going to need that more than ever now. I mean, we've got a president who goes over everybody's, or president-elect who goes over everybody's head with a, you know, with a tweeting communication system, who can say anything he pleases, and it's going to be much more of a challenge now than ever, I think.
Well, I will tell you, I know a few politicians who you have taken to task in your column, and it was.
I'm sure they're dancing with glee right now.
Well, it was a mix. I'm sure someone would say, "Finally, that SOB's off my back." Yeah. But there was this certain badge of courage. When Phil ripped you one, right? Yeah. He did it artfully, but you kind of made, maybe not always the way you wanted, but you kind of made it. Yeah. And I know that since then, if I get asked a question a dozen times, it's like, what were they thinking? Reisman? And I said, yeah.
Well,
so
that's nice to hear.
Oh, it is. And it's 100% genuine. Anyway.
And I'll reinvent myself. I'll come. You'll see me next time. I'll be wearing goggles.
Oh,
you know, the virtual reality goggles. I look like RoboCop. You know, wired. You know.
Hey, well, we're going to keep seeing you, and I appreciate it. I just thought, given our conversation, who better than you to talk about the evolving marketplace? Thank you,
Appreciate
Phil.
it.
Coming up next, we will pivot to two sad stories, two funerals, one for an icon formerly of the NYPD, and another, a life snuffed out far too soon, a 13-year-old girl dying in broad daylight at the end of a gun in Mount Vernon.